Okay, so what I'm going to do for this PowerPoint, and you may want to have a piece of paper in front of you, or if you printed this, what I normally do when I go through this, um, hard to see, but I have under each image, I've listed origin, insertion, and action. So I'm going to give a little bit of notes on each one. So the trapezius, to review, its origin is the dorsal neck, and it inserts at the spine of the scapula. And one concept to really make sure you understand, and people get this confused all the time, the insertion site always is more movable, and it always moves towards origin. So when this muscle contracts, when a muscle contracts, it shortens its length. By nature, it doesn't meet in the middle. Okay, if origin is here, insertion is going to pull more towards origin. So by action, if it originates at the dorsal neck near the cervical vertebrae, it inserts at the spine of the scapula, it's going to naturally pull that limb forward. So its action is called to advance the limb, advance it. And again, it has, the naming convention is named on its shape, like a trapezoid. Trapezius comes from trapezoid. So if you saw this picture, if I had this blank and I said, what muscle is this? And then if I say, what is its action? I mean, obviously you can look at it and say, oh, that's here. It looks like a trapezoid, must be the trapezius. Okay. So on this slide, it's origin, dorsal neck, inserts at the spine of the scapula, and it advances the limb. And muscles always are more movable at insertion. They move towards origin. The pectorals, superficial and deep, both originate at the sternum, right here at the sternobrae. They insert at the tubercle of the humerus. Now again, this bone right here is the humerus, and they're going to pull towards origin, so they're going to pull towards the sternum. So what they do is they adduct the limb. If my humerus is here, it's going to pull towards origin. They are adductors. So when you do this exercise at the gym, this is the one that you're doing. And they're pulling towards this origin site. They will also, to some degree, they can pull the limb caudal, but they are primarily adductors. And if you see this picture, pectorals, again, that's a name that doesn't necessarily, it's not really like a shape. It's not really like the numbers of the muscle bellies or the muscle bodies. It is just, it has its name of what it is. So that one doesn't kind of go by our rules of naming muscles. A latissimus dorsi, it originates at the last 7 thoracic vertebrae, or the thoracic vertebrae, but primarily you've got some thoracic vertebrae here. It's more caudal. This is more of the tendon of that muscle. It inserts at the humeral tuberosity, or the tuberosity of the humerus, which is here. Okay, it's going to kind of wrap around. What it's going to do is going to pull towards origin. So by nature, it draws the limb caudal, and when it does that, it's going to flex the shoulder. So this is what it goes like this. Okay, by pulling my limb towards those thoracic vertebrae, it naturally flexes this joint, or it flexes the shoulder. Okay, and if you need me to repeat anything, just let me know. This muscle, which the serratus ventralis, now this one is named for its appearance. Serratus serration. and think of that serrated knife, that knife you have that has the little jagged edges. The jagged appearance of this muscle are serrations. And then ventralis, they're pointing ventral. So if you looked, if I showed you this picture and I said, what is this muscle? You're like, oh, it's got those little jagged serrations, serratus ventralis. This is more of a muscle of support. It originates at the cervical vertebrae, right up here. It inserts at the dorsomedial scapula. So it's not attaching to the outside, it's attaching to the medial aspect, which is facing internal. And it is a supports the trunk. So again, a little bit of the thoracic cavity in the abdomen is considered the trunk. So it's more of a muscle. It doesn't move a joint. It's support. Sternocephalicus, this is on your list. This one is named for origin and insertion. If I gave you the name of this muscle, I could say to you, what is the naming convention of this muscle? It doesn't tell you shape. It doesn't tell you number. It's telling you origin insertion. Sternocephalicus originates at the sternum. It inserts at the, well, cephalicus pertains to head. It inserts at the occipital bone. Remember, the occipital bone is the most caudal bone of the skull. So what it's going to do, it's going to pull towards origin, which is the sternum. So that's going to turn the head from side to side. You have one on each side. So depending on which way it pulls, it's going to pull towards origin. Insertion, origin. So if what I always try to tell students when they study is you put yourself in the mind of a teacher. What could I ask you about this? I could ask you where it is. I could ask you, where does the name come from? I could ask you, what is the action? So that's why I've given you kind of a defined group of muscles to know. And this may be flipping cards over and quizzing and quizzing and quizzing yourself. Okay, next one is going to be now this one has two on here. The slide says temporalis. I do have temporalis and masseter, but I want to stress where masseter is. Masseter originates at the zygomatic arch. So the origin of masseter is the zygomatic arch, which is this cheekbone right here, inside. It inserts at the lateral mandible. So here's the mandible, outside aspect, and it elevates the mandible for chewing, okay? Because it's going to pull towards origin, so it's going to pull towards the zygomatic arch. When that muscle relaxes, the jaw opens. When the muscle contracts, it closes. Open, relaxation, contraction, relaxation, contraction. But again, mandible's moving towards origin. So masseter is the primary muscle of chewing. Temporalis is an associated muscle of chewing. So temporalis aids in chewing. Masseter is the primary muscle of chewing. So they kind of, remember I said, you'll often have more than one muscle in a location that helps provide an action, okay? Okay. Now this picture, what I was focusing on, and like I said, if you watched the video, any of those dissection videos, there is a better, I think it's like the third or fourth video, and I think I put in parentheses, it's dissection of the hind limb. That one will be helpful to explain some of the muscles that are on your list. All I listed for semimembranosus and tendinosus is that they originate at the ischiatic tuberosity. That's the bone that comes off the back of the pelvis. If I look at this picture, if I take the muscles away, ilium is up here, ischium is back here, pubis is underneath. The pubis is ventral. So that little point, remember a tuberosity is attachment, it originates at the ischiatic tuberosity. It inserts at the femur and the tibia. So the membranosus and tendinosus come down. The femur would be right here. The tibia is down here. What it's going to do is going to pull towards that ischiatic tuberosity. It's going to pull towards origin. And by doing that, it's going to extend the hip, but it also flexes the stifle. What is the other important reason to know these muscles? Someone can type it in. There's two. Yep, it's an injection site, number one. What else did I tell you to worry about between these muscles? Yes, the sciatic nerve runs right in between those two. So membranosus, it's hard to see on this picture, but we've got the membranosus is more medial, M for M. Tendinosus is more lateral. When you give an injection, you grab both of them. Okay, you kind of grab them like a chunk. In between that sciatic nerve. So we always grab the muscles and we point caudal. One of the links that I sent you, and it was, I put in parentheses, it's called Burnsy's Videos, or Burnsy RVT. She's an instructor, and I think she's out of Canada, and she's made several YouTube videos, so they might be good for other classes. I've kind of stumbled upon them. She uses a lot of the same book. They're set up a little different, but she talks about that sciatic muscle, or that sciatic nerve that goes between. So you always want to point caudal. You will learn that in your injections class, but it's important to understand. So membranosus, tendinosus, muscles of injection, sciatic nerve runs between, flexes, stifle, extends the hip. One other thing on this back leg picture, I don't have the origin and insertion listed because I only wanted you to know origin and insertion for this muscle, but we talk about on your list, we have the quadriceps femoris and the biceps femoris. Okay, quadriceps are on the cranial thigh, so the quadriceps are up here. The biceps femoris is this one right here. Gluteal is up here. So we have glutes, quads, biceps, membranosus, and tendinosus. Kind of going from front to back, wrapping around the limb. One that I added, and since I'm on this picture, is the gastrocnemius. Now the gastrocnemius, the point of insertion is what's the most important about that. And this leg cuts it off, but this is the calcanean tuberosity. The tendon, the Achilles tendon, is right here. The Achilles tendon is a continuation of the gastrocnemius. So the gastrocnemius is a little more caudal medial, kind of comes in and goes on the inside of the leg, but the end of that gastrocnemius is going to attach. And so what it does is it pulls towards origin, so it extends the hock and it flexes the stifle, the gastrocnemius. So of the back leg on your study guide, the back leg muscles that we talked about are the quadriceps femoris, the gastrocnemius, tendinosus membranosus, and the biceps femoris. So those are the muscles of the back leg. And because they have femoris, I could say, do you find the biceps femoris on the front leg or the back leg? And obviously you would tell me because there's a biceps brachii and a biceps femoris. So there is both of those muscles. One is in the front and one is in the back, and they are named for their location and how many muscles they are. Biceps is 2 branches. Okay. You didn't need to know deltoideus, and I took off infraspinatus. So let's talk about triceps brachii. Triceps brachii, let me skip down to that one, originates at the caudal scapula border inserts at the olecranon of the ulna. So if we look at this picture here, this is the radius, this is the ulna. That little projection, which is the back of our elbow, is the olecranon. So what happens is, okay, this is the triceps here, biceps is here. When they pull, their action is to extend the elbow. But by doing that, a lot of times this action causes the shoulder to flex. Not always, but so it causes extension of the elbow, flexes the shoulder. And there are 3 branches, and it's found on the forelimb. So brachii, front limb, triceps, 3 branches, pulls this towards origin. So by pulling that olecranon, it's going to pull, it's going to extend this joint. It's also going to cause flexion of this is the shoulder, this is the elbow. Extends this, flexes this. Now extensor carpi radialis, obviously radialis is the radius, this is the forelimb, the bones here are the radius and the ulna, okay. Extensor carna, it originates at the lateral condyle of the humerus. So the humerus is up here. The condyles are right in here. Condyles are the rollers underneath. Epicondyles are above. Remember, epicondyles are attachment. Condyles are like the rollers. So it's going to attach on the lateral aspect, but it's going to insert at the proximal metacarpal, number 3, but I would just accept it, it inserts at the metacarpal, and it's an extensor. It extends the carpus. I have had people on a test tell me this flexes the carpus. Extensor is in the name. Extensors are always found on the top, flexors are found on the bottom. Cranial, caudal, anterior, posterior. But obviously if they pull towards origin and they're attached to a metacarpal, when it pulls, it's going to pull this way, by nature lifts this or extends the carpus. And obviously you wouldn't tell me this is a muscle of the hip. Carpi radialis, you've got the origin, you've got the insertion, you've got the action. So the name tells you everything you need to know. Okay, so Sean, you were asking about the epaxial group, and it's kind of just the one I have on the last page. And I had added this because the epaxial group has all of these muscles in it. But I don't go over the individual muscles. I don't, longissimus, iliocostalis, splenus, iliopsoas. Those are all making this epaxial group, but they are the muscles of the back, dorsal back. So all I wanted you to understand, hang on one second. Hang on, so hold that thought. Sorry, I thought I had a throwing up creature. Okay, we're good. I'm back. We're all good. False alarm. Okay, so the main thing in this group, I'm not going over an insertion action. Obviously, the epaxials are muscles of support. They also help flex the back. But these are muscles of injection. And some things that I want you to know about this group is important landmarks. You always, if we're going to do this injection, we go caudal to the rib. Does anyone remember why I said you don't want to inject at the point of the last rib or above? Yes. Your kidneys live right in these areas, both kidneys. That's why in class I usually go, if someone gives you a kidney punch in boxing, they kind of come up here and go under your rib, and they're trying to punch your kidney. So as long as you feel the last rib and you move caudal, you should be away from the kidneys. And then you never go right on midline. That's where the vertebrae are. Now, like I said, it would be very, very difficult to aim an injection and get between two vertebrae. Remember, your vertebrae are protecting the spinal cord, but there is a gap between every vertebrae. If you went right on midline in between, there is the spinal cord. But as long as you feel midline, you feel the dorsal process, and you go off one side or the other, then you should be in this nice little muscle group. And you have anywhere from the last rib to the wing of the ilium. You can give that injection on either side, but step off of the dorsal spinous process, go caudal, and you either point up and down or caudal, never cranial. So those are the things I stressed about the epaxials. I only bring it up because you go over those for muscles of injection. Now, I don't have a picture of the abdominal muscles, but on your study guide, I put rectus abdominis. Rectus abdominis, and as part of their abdominal group, the abdominal muscles are named for their direction. There's three. Rectus is long ways. Okay, transverse is a perpendicular angle. So rectus, transverse, and then oblique. So three of these layers of muscles aid in respiration, aid in vomiting, and flex the back. So that is the job. But remember, what does a abdominal muscle attach to? Because I don't have the bones in the abdomen, so I have to attach to something. The linea alba, right. And the linea alba is something called an aponeurosis, and I'll type that in. So that is the connective tissue that those abdominal muscles attach to underneath. And that's what they cut through when they do a SPAY or any abdominal surgery. To get into the abdomen, you have to cut through the linea alba. You go through the skin, the muscle, the subcutaneous fat, and then you'll see this white line. You have to be on midline, right down the middle, and then you cut through that alba, and there's your abdomen. Okay. Now, I have on here, I did not list it as a muscle group, but you may want to make a note about the thoracic muscles, or the muscles of respiration. I'm going to type it in. So the muscles of respiration, we talked, if this is, I can look at this picture kind of and imagine in between these ribs, remember costal means rib, inter means between. So the intercostals are the muscles that are found in between the ribs. There are two layers. There'd be external and internal. The externals contract and pull the rib cage open. The internals contract and pull the rib cage in. When an animal inhales, the externals contract, and then right here, along those ribs, you would have the diaphragm. The diaphragm contracts as well, and that expands the thoracic cavity. Air comes in. The abdominal muscles push. The internal intercostals contract. The thoracic cavity decreases, and that's how there's exhalation. So I do want you to be able to tell me a muscle or two of respiration. They weren't listed as a picture, but we just talked about that in lecture. It was one of the slides in the main PowerPoint. Okay, so let me just go through some of the questions on the study guide. Does anyone have any pictures about these images? Actually, let me do something. Let me, oops. Let me pull up. Oh, hang on. You guys can still see my screen, right? Hang on, I lost my chat screen. Oh, there we are. Okay, this is what my, I don't know if you've played Kahoot in other classes, you probably have. This is what my page looks like. So you can see if you scroll down, there's my baby. There's nervous system, and here is one on bones. So when you open my page, you should see these, you know, there's ones for other classes, but those are the ones that I would play to help you review. Let me go ahead and pull up. Okay, so let's just go through this a little bit. Okay, so just reviewing through the study guide, what are characteristics of muscles and their basic function? A characteristic, what can it do? It can excite, contract, extend, and has to be elastic. But what is the job? It says, what are their functions? Motion, posture, and heat is what the muscle is supposed to do. So provide the frames, provide support. I talked about the characteristic and appearance is basically what it does and what it does. So skeletal is striated and voluntary. Smooth is non-striated and involuntary, and cardiac is striated and involuntary. Remember, anything's voluntary, you can choose to do it. You can choose to move your bones. Your heart is going to beat without you telling it to, and your stomach, your bladder, your intestines, your blood vessels, they all do jobs without you telling them to do it. So anything that's involuntary is going to be on its own. Remember, the nervous system controls all of our muscle actions. I talked about what an aponeurosis is on the study guide. What attachment is continuous with the fascia and connects muscle to bone? That would be a tendon. Remember, a tendon, it doesn't show it to you in this picture, but basically all this muscle would narrow to a tendon. So a tendon is continuous with the muscle, meaning it's not two structures they kind of form into a tendon. Number 5, I just explained which ones are voluntary and involuntary. Visceral smooth muscle for number 6. Remember I said anytime something is visceral, it's pertaining to organ. But where do you find smooth muscle? And in the notes, we talked about hollow organs. So visceral smooth muscle would be bladder, intestine, stomach, blood vessels, things like that. They're typically hollow organs. So be able to give me an example if I ask you. What for number 7 was, what do adductors, abductors, flexors, and extensors do? Be able to give an example of a muscle that performs one of those 4 actions. So those actions are usually going to be described in the muscles I just talked to you about, you know, if a muscle flexes or extends. So you have those muscles that do that. But if I go, hang on, where's my slide? The 4, sorry, I'm trying not to give everybody a seizure this morning. Let me stress this again. Origin versus insertion, stable versus movable site. The adductors bring the limb back to the body. Abductors take the limb away, abduct, take away. A flexor is going to decrease the angle of a limb. An extensor is going to increase the angle of a limb. So if I say, what are the 4 actions a muscle can have on a limb? What are the 4 actions a muscle can have on a limb? It can flex, extend, adduct, or abduct. So those are the 4 primary. When we did the bones, we talked about circumduction and rotation. That's only at the hip and shoulder. But the 4 basic things we talk about are flexors, extensors, adductors, and abductors. And then number 8, I said, where is the primary site of action? Origin or insertion. And that is origin. It says, what is the difference between origin and insertions? Origin is the more stable site. Insertion is the more movable site. So that question kind of means, that 2 parts kind of mean the same thing. The primary site of action is insertion. Origin is where you come from. Think of that, that's stable. I come from Chicago. That's never going to change. No matter how many places I move in my life, my origin is from the south side of Chicago. Everything else can change. Stable, changing. Origin is stable. Insertion is always moving towards origin. So if that helps you remember it, maybe. Describing how a muscle action is initiated. So when I talk, and then remember I talked about the naming. I only spent about 20 minutes on this slide, it felt like. So if I tell you, how do we name a muscle? Action, shape, location, direction, number of heads, attachment sites. Get to this slide. Okay. Neuromuscular junction is where the nervous system joins the muscles. Neuromuscular junction, okay? It is connected, but there is that tiny gap, which is the synaptic cleft. This is the presynaptic membrane. This is the postsynaptic membrane. When a nerve, a motor nerve, motor muscle movement, a motor nerve sends a signal to the muscle, the neurotransmitter is being held in the neuron at the synaptic knob. The acetylcholine is in the end. When that signal comes down, the receptor for acetylcholine is on the muscle. Acetylcholine is released, it binds to the receptor on the muscle, and then we get this reaction. Okay? This is the slide I'm talking about. And I want you to be familiar with this order. Nerve is simple. Simple. Signal comes down a motor nerve. Acetylcholine jumps that little gap, which is the synaptic cleft. It finds a receptor on the muscle. Once acetylcholine binds to that receptor, it's going to travel through the muscle cell, through that sarcolemma. Once it reaches the sarcoplasmic reticulum of that muscle cell, calcium is going to be initiated. Calcium will flow in, and calcium will cause those little muscle fibers to contract. Acetylcholine is the neurotransmitter that initiates that. Calcium is what is released from the muscle to allow that to happen. The energy needed for this to happen is your ATP. Okay, so that's the energy needed to allow this to occur. And then when we have the cell, the muscle cell will start pumping calcium back in. Calcium full comes out, energy is stopped, the muscle goes back to normal size. So that's how number 9, ATP is the energy for number 10. Not that you have to, you could call it ATP, adenotransferrin phosphatase. You can just say ATP is the energy for muscle contraction. Myoglobin is stored oxygen in the muscle, because I remember I told you, you didn't need to know all or nothing principle. You didn't need to know muscle contraction. I just want you to know ATP is the energy. Myoglobin is stored oxygen. Glycogen is stored glucose. So that's all energy. As long as you're in a normal state, you should be taking in enough oxygen to initiate this. Sometimes the body has to access stored oxygen when demand goes above what we're bringing in, and that's when we get into anaerobic metabolism. I talked about obviously producing heat, and then sympathetic. Remember, sympathetic stimulation is going, now skeletal is more under sympathetic control, because in fight and flight, your skeletal muscles need resources because you're going to run or evade. Your cardiac muscle is going to be stimulated because the heart needs to pump faster. Your smooth muscle is the only thing that slows down in sympathetic stimulation. And then the opposite happens in parasympathetic stimulation. So if anyone has questions about that, talked about the structure. Remember, the big thing was striated with cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle. The muscle fibers slide together in a linear fashion because they're striated like strips. Smooth muscle, actin and myosin fibers are in an X, and these are why these hollow organs cinch in the middle, okay? Because these fibers contract towards the middle. So they're not, smooth muscle isn't arranged like this, smooth muscle is like this. The SA node is the pacemaker of the heart. So for number 12, SA node is the pacemaker. It begins cardiac muscle contraction. Every cell is going to follow the leader. The leader is the SA node. Remember I said if we are following someone like a follow the leader, if the person in the front of the line speeds up, we all got to speed up. If they slow down, we all slow down. The SA node sets the pace, and then all the muscle cells follow, so the heart contracts in a coordinated fashion. And it is found in the right atrium. My pet peeve on a test is if I say, where is the SA node? And someone says, in the heart. Heart has a lot of different spots. You have to, I would mark you wrong for that. I sometimes have people tell me the atrium. Which atrium? There's a right atrium and a left atrium. It is found, you have to be specific, in the right atrium of the heart. And it is what generates the heartbeat. I have a note on here, byproduct of anaerobic metabolism is lactic acid. So when you get into an anaerobic state, the body produces lactic acid. Lactic acid can build up and can cause, can create some, it messes with your acid-base balance. It can make them feel nauseous. So the more that an animal is in this anaerobic state, the higher the production of lactic acid. Remember too, you do not need a nerve supply to the heart. Okay, the heart is going to beat because of the SA node. Boom, boom, boom. I mean, a lot of people, this sounds morbid, a lot of people that are brain dead, the heart is still beating. There is a lack of mental activity or brain activity, but the heart is still beating because the heart is not dependent on brain function to function, if that makes sense. So, but if the sympathetic nervous system needs the heart to beat faster, it does give feedback. So there is innervation into the heart. There is nerve supply to the heart. All I want you to know is that the heart is not dependent on that nerve supply to beat. But if we are scared, one of the first things that happens is your heart's like beating out of your chest, because in that sympathetic fight and flight, the heart is going to speed up to meet demand. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Is there any questions? Because I know it's getting close to 11. Based on any of this, maybe something from the lab homework. My goal is when I'm done with the lecture, I convert the video. When the video is converted, I load it up to YouTube. I have to get a quiz ready for my next class. So what I'll probably do once they start their quiz as I will, in the email, send you the link to the homework, the lab exercises. I just went over the study guide. Okay. I'll send the lab link. I'll give you my Kahoot name, which I've already done. There is Purpose Games. Now, as far as the bones and the nervous system, the only images that I may ask again is about a long bone or the skeleton. So I'm not going to add a new image to the test that you haven't had already. Now, for this material, this is new. You need to be familiar with the pictures that I just went over in the previous PowerPoint. So if you see those images, I may ask you questions about those muscles, but I just gave you notes about every one of those pictures. Okay. So if you have questions, again, you should be able to go back into Teacheries and access your old tests. If you can't, email me. Okay. Much past 9, 10 o'clock. Sometimes I'm up late, but make sure you get questions to me. If it's overnight, I might not get it till the morning, but those are all the resources you will have. Purpose Games is good too. Are there any questions that I can answer for anybody? Well, let me say one thing.